context of a free trade agreement. Think of the number of goods we each produce, from textiles to mangoes to cricket bats, that we would know would be of interest to each other's consumers. I can see your fruits being a huge hit in India. You can quintuple your exports of surplus cement to India's growing construction sector. Now, from an Indian point of view, it seems absurd that the Pakistani consumer should be paying 3 times the price for Indian goods shipped through and repackaged in Dubai, when we live next door to each other. And access to the gigantic Indian market would help Pakistan's manufacturers and exporters of all stripes. But we can go beyond that. Just a couple of days ago in Lahore, I had a wonderful conversation with your eminent educationist, Dr. Sherry Rehman, and he was talking about the enormous need and potential for educational exchanges between India and Pakistan. And one of the things we both agreed upon was in the 21st century, we don't even necessarily need governments to agree on this. What is to prevent a couple of good universities from setting up video conference links and having their students hear each other's lectures, for example? There's just so much potential for exchanging this sort of cooperation, just as you know today, Pakistani singers, actors, and models seem to find Bombay and Bollywood rather fertile ground. We can see this extending to other sectors, including, in my view, education. And I don't want to just talk the language of self-interest. There is a question of heart. My wife, whose grandfather was from Lahore, keeps telling me that heart is what is missing in all this talk about India-Pakistan relations. But I protest to her that India shows its good faith time after time, persisting in peace talks, for example, after the Kabul embassy bombing, offering aid after every single natural disaster Pakistan has ever suffered. You remember the instance when India offered $25 million after your terrible floods, and the Pakistani government actually denied for days whether to accept it. Initially rejected it, and finally grudgingly said we'll accept Indian money if it comes through the UN, but not directly. And India still gave it through the UN. I mean, these are not acts of bad faith. These are not acts of a country that wants to destabilize or hurt you. These are acts of a country that genuinely wants to live in peace with this neighborhood. In fact, in the summer of 2009, less than 7 months after 26/11, and so soon after the Indian domestic political endeavors was, the Indian team played the Pakistani team at a charity cricket match in England, with the proceeds going to the relief of displaced people from Swat. Every penny, in other words, being spent here in Pakistan, a country from which terrorists had attacked India just a few months previously. So the goodwill and the heart of India should not be doubted. I know there will be some who will say we too are victims of terrorism. As I've said earlier, we definitely understand and empathize with those Pakistani victims of terrorism whose numbers have been increasing in recent years. But there is, unfortunately, no moral equivalence, even if we share the same problems, because no one came across in India to wreak havoc on Pakistani civilians and Pakistani homes, even Pakistani military installations. In India, sadly, we have been the victim of attacks that have been proven to have originated and been corrected. Yeah, that is a big difference. It cannot, therefore, be seen as a case of equivalence. Friendship can be built, however, on the shared perception of danger, of a sincere acceptance that those who bombed the Taj or the Oberoi in Mumbai are just as evil and dangerous as those who bombed the Marriott in Islamabad. If we can agree to that, then we can go well beyond the fuzzy words and rhetoric of Track-II dialogues. We can get into genuine cooperation in all the areas that I've mentioned, including some of the hard-headed ones that are needed. Useful information sharing. We actually have a joint working group on terrorism, which has not shared one useful shred of information so far. We can give that real content. And as I said, action would substitute for all the misunderstandings and all the one-upmanship that no doubt both sides are trying to play. I even think that Afghanistan, an area where there seems to be an unhealthy sense of competition developing, is an area where there's tremendous potential for action cooperation. I believe it's in the interest of both Pakistan and India to have a stable, moderate, functioning Afghanistan. But we have not yet chosen to make common cause in that extended neighborhood. A country that can be, in many ways, a springboard to Central Asia for both of us, and which is instead being racked by conflicts in which we find ourselves very often on opposite sides. So what then is the way forward? From an Indian point of view, it seems that India wants peace more than some in Pakistan do, because we have more at stake than Pakistan when peace is violated. We know we cannot grow and prosper without peace. That is the one thing that Pakistan can give us that we cannot do without. And from a narrow Indian point of view, it can be said that if Pakistan chooses to deny us the peace we crave, Pakistan can effectively undermine our vital national interests. Above all, to go back to the beginning of my remarks, the interests of the government. Investors shun war zone, traders are wary of markets that might explode at any time, tourists do not travel to hotels that might be commanded by crazed fanatics. These are all serious hazards for a country that is seeking to grow and flourish in a globalized world. So even if Pakistan cannot do us much good, it can do us immense harm. And every Indian hawk would have to recognize this before formulating the wrong policy approaches to Pakistan. Equally, for the doves in India, foreign policy cannot be built on a sense of betrayal any more than it can be built on illusions of love. Pragmatism dictates that we should work for peace with Pakistan, precisely so that we can serve our own people's needs better. We recognize the problem cannot be solved overnight, that extremism cannot be turned off like a tap, that the proliferation of militant organizations, training camps, extremist ideologies has acquired a momentum of its own that would not be easy to reverse, and that a population as young, as uneducated, and as unemployed, and as radicalized as appears to be growing in Pakistan, will remain a menace principally to your own society as well as to ours. But this is not a counsel of negativism, it is in fact an argument to offer a helping hand if Pakistan wants it. Because from an Indian point of view, a neighbor full of desperate young men without hope or prospects will be a permanent threat to 21st century India. If we can help Pakistan's transcending circumstances, if we can help Pakistan develop a mutual stake in a mutually beneficial process, we will be each helping the other to grow. I think that India's success will help Pakistan. I believe Pakistan's success will help India for the reasons I've already mentioned. Indeed, Pakistan, it is time, in my view, for Pakistan to start looking to the advantages that might accrue to it as a neighbor and partner of an increasingly prosperous. To have two neighbors on either side that you are essentially involved in military activities in, rather than in economic trade and prosperity with, is really a shame for Pakistan. And I do believe that India, by offering a market for Pakistani traders and industrialists, a creative umbrella for wonderful artists and singers, a home away from home for those seeking refuge from the realities of the challenges here and necessary, all of this. And India, and this I say to Indians in India as well. I'm very upset that India reacted to 26/11 by restricting visas for Pakistanis. Those of you who travel to India and try to travel to India know how difficult it is to get visas. And I point out in India that none of the perpetrators of 26/11 had applied for a visa. They came without it. We shouldn't worry about those who do apply. We should worry about those who don't need them. We need in India to also show that kind of acknowledgement of the situation here, and a magnanimity and a generosity of spirit to open our doors to those Pakistanis who wish to walk through. The big questions, like the Kashmir dispute, and like the problem of terrorism, will require a great deal more groundwork and constructive step-by-step action for progress to be made. But I think if there's accommodativeness on both sides, India certainly might be, as a larger country, more magnanimous on issues like visas and trade, we might be able to turn the bilateral narrative away from the logic of intractable hostility in which both countries have been mired for too long. I think I'm not going to cut back the last few remarks I was going to make so we can have more time for questions, but I do want to stress, ultimately, that the global economic crisis, I return to the beginnings of my remarks, the global economic crisis ought to be one more final, non-subcontinental argument for us to behave better with each other and to cooperate with each other. Because the need, as well as the opportunity, to promote economic integration with our neighbors in the subcontinent is vital. I mean, the growing Indian market can actually lift. The joke about the rising tide lifting all boats would apply to all the boats in the subcontinent. But as long as South Asia remains divided by futile rivalries, and as long as some believe that terrorism can be a useful instrument, that will remain a distant. We need, on the subcontinent, to look to a better future, to to an interrelated future on our territories, where geography becomes an instrument of opportunity in a mutual growth story, rather than proximity being a threat, where history binds us rather than divides us, where trade and cross-border links flourish and bring prosperity to all of our peoples. Some will say that these are merely dreams, yet there are few worthwhile achievements in the world that have not been preceded by dreams, by ambitious aspirations. But dreams will only turn into reality if both of us, India and Pakistan, take action to accomplish this bright future together. We must work to create a world in which Indians and Pakistanis can both prosper in safety and security, a peaceful world in which democratic India and democratic Pakistan can play a worthy part. This is the aspiration that Prime Minister Nehru and Yogi and Jinnah launched to all. And that when Nehru spoke of a tryst with destiny, this is the destiny he had in mind. As we embark on the second decade of the 21st century, the time has indeed come when we must redeem his pledge. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Of your views about Pakistan relations, I'm sure that generated a lot of questions. But before I open the floor for questions and answers, I would like our two panelists, Naseem Zahra and Ijaz Haider, to speak for 5 minutes, giving their views, and then we go to questions and answers. So to start with Ijaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Let me just begin by saying that Dr. Tharoor's praise for Jinnah Institute, the credit entirely goes to Ms. Sherry Rehman and her team. I am a new entrant, and the good work that they've done over the last year and a quarter, I'm happy that you acknowledge that, and we hope to pursue further and try and expand and increase the capacity. I am actually here because Ms. Rehman is now poised to take on a very stressful job as Pakistan's new ambassador to the United States. Very quickly, and I don't want to stand between you and the audience, because I think, as Ambassador Khan said, there are lots of questions. H.L. Mencken said that poetry has done enough when it can charm, but prose must also convince. So there is the poetry of your talk that I agree with, but then there is the hardmost prose, where there are points in terms of what you said, that there are always data sets, and how you actually walk in and through those data sets depends on your perceptions. So I'm just going to quickly point out a few things. Before, to use your term, in one of the write-ups where we were sparring together, before we can defenestrate our sort of disparate perceptions about this, since I was noting these, I think we need to understand, and in Pakistan we do, because we also are pretty critical of our own state, that states that are locked in a conflictual paradigm operate on, it's a kind of dialectic. When you talk about Pakistan and Pakistan's behavior over the last 60 years, you cannot overlook the fact that that behavior has unfolded in a dialectical relationship with India, and therefore India also needs to begin to look at what it might have been doing or it is doing in order for Pakistan to be reacting or acting in the way that it has done that. For instance, you talked about the erstwhile East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and you said that this was a special case. This was a special case where India used international law, humanitarian intervention, in order to push forward a goal that was essentially grounded in realpolitik. So therefore we have to understand that And I think the Harvard law professor David Kennedy has written a remarkable book of War and Law, where he has actually mentioned how stronger states use international law and law in order to justify things that are essentially grounded in real and mass polity. I must also say that I completely agree with you on the use of non-state actors in terms of how they unfold ultimately. But perhaps since we talk about this, I would say that today's Jaish-e-Mohammed and yesterday's Mufti Bani and LTTE, they are part of a seamless continuum where India has much to be blamed for in terms of introducing Cold War into this region. You also talked about NFU. As someone who has done a lot of work in nuclear strategy, I can assure you, sir, that NFU is for the birds. I must also tell you that India has moved away in real terms from its NFU. Yes, I can cite that, not here but later. The only person who has actually talked about a verifiable NFU is the Chinese strategist, Levine, and those 4 benchmarks that he gives about NFU are actually unworkable because no state with nuclear weapons is actually going to accept those verification mechanisms. And finally, you talked about the Haji Pir Pass. And it's interesting because in our sparring, you also mentioned that. But if you go back and look at the documents, you realize that post-1965 war, the territory exchange was such that India had to decide between keeping Kargil or letting go of Haji Pir Pass. So, and I think India was smart. And you can check with military officers on both sides and they'll tell you, anyone who has seen the terrain would know that India made the correct decision of retaining Kargil and letting go of Haji Pir Pass. So it was not India's largest, but it was part of the post-war framework under which those exchanges happened. There is much else, but I think we can, since we are also going to have a roundtable tomorrow at Jinnah Institute, we will have occasion to talk about that. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Jinnah Institute for getting Mr. Shashi Tharoor over to Pakistan. I think that it's very important that we have a candid dialogue and discussions amongst ourselves. And I'd like to thank Mr. Tharoor for actually speaking the way he did. It was very candid dialogue, and I want to candid opening remarks and his talk. And I would like to continue in that spirit. As I sat there, I wondered whether I was this fiction or was it fact? And I think that is in some ways the basic issue regarding narratives. The fact is that we function in 2 different worlds. We have 2 different narratives. But I would like to say that in Pakistan, we have tried very hard. I think there is a whole body of work that has been done. I think there are people in this country who are actually are revisiting the original narrative, the narrative of the 50s and 60s and so on. And so we've always in Pakistan argued, and we've argued as far as our leadership is concerned, as far as our establishment is concerned, the political leadership is concerned, that you've got to really have a vision of the future, and the kind of vision that Mr. Tharoor talked about. But I got to say that I was very struck by some of the selective recalls. In terms of 1971, on the one hand, you're talking about attacks on Kargil, etc., and on the other hand, when we talk about 1971, I think it's rather simplistic to push it on the side as some event, as a special event. I think that what's happened between these two countries, all events in some ways have been special. We need to go beyond where we are standing today. In terms of the selective records, Mr. Tharoor, you talked about Prime Minister Nehru and his vision. Let's recall that Prime Minister Nehru was one who stood in the parliament and talked about plebiscite for the Kashmiris. So, I mean, in terms of selective records. In terms of the Pakistan army, and a couple of things. In terms of MFN, you repeated 3 or 4 times the large-heartedness of India for giving MFN to Pakistan 16 years ago. But the fact is, World Bank report after report says that India's non-tariff barriers are some of the worst, and they actually discourage trade, discourage import into India. Then in terms of where we are today, plebiscite, something large-heartedness and India, you look at something as small